Yeah, 24 hours.
It's really great to see you all here. This is the final lecture for the season for the Frontiers in Science program with the Sister Science Club. We do this for the community, and it's very gratifying to see so many people here to show their belief in science. I think it's an important thing for us, and we're so lucky as a community to have so many people willing to volunteer their time to come speak to us, because they're all volunteers. A few thank yous, and then we're going to get right to the program. Angeline, thank you so much. I think many of us really feel like this is our living room. I was just here earlier in the week to see Jennifer Fox, and I don't know if any of you were here, but it was an amazing show. Really, really good. So thanks, Angeline. We love being here. With the board of the Sister Science Club, please just stand up and we can acknowledge you all. Thank you. David Durham back here. Thanks, board. I'm on the board as well. My name's David Ellis, by the way. Or Joe or Larry? Joe Sherry and Larry Price helped me on a small committee in hunting down speakers for you all. And it's really fun. It requires getting to know people in the community, but also looking a little farther afield. So we get to read about science happening at the universities and try to coerce people into coming up to our community and talking to us. We really enjoy it. Peyton Meyer does our sound for us. He's been doing a great job. He has his own business doing this. And so if anybody needs a sound guy, he's really good. Dana Greenblatt. Some of you might have noticed that you just had the opportunity to vote for Dana. Sorry, Dana, but Dana keeps us all organized. And, she just does a great job with it. So thanks, Dana. And of course, Ann Richardson keeps us honest. She does our books. She was taking money to the door. And so thank you, Ann. So I wanted to just really quickly run through the season that we just had. And I hope most of you were able to attend most of these. We started in July with Dr. Shane Larson and the cosmos. Probing the cosmos in gravitational waves. Then we went underwater, shark-infested waters. And Dr. Taylor Chappell of Oregon State told us why that's a good thing. Dr. Deanna Olson told us about geologic genomics and amphibian conservation. And then who can forget Jerry Freilich? I mean, he's just so energetic, and he brought us Biodiversity Begins with a Bee. And if you were here, it was all about bees in that person. It was really great. And then our own Rima Gibbett and Scott Woodford told us why we should care about our dark skies here in Sisters. So that was great. Then Dr. Eric Schur regaled us with gene therapy, genetic engineering, the hype, the reality, and the future. Dr. Lisa talks the history of the Earth's magnetic field strength over the last 4 million years. Dr. Kevin Hodgson, nuclear energy, fundamentals, applications, and future development. You can see, if you didn't see those, you can see them on our website. We have a YouTube channel that you can hook into and watch them at home. Next year, just some topics that we're hoping to bring are AI, an amazing nature photographer who has been working photographing the Cascade red fox in the North Cascades. A presentation about the dam on Lake Billy Chinook, and there's a lot of controversy about the way it mixes water and the impact on the fisheries into the chutes downstream. So we're going to have a talk about that, I believe. PFAS chemicals in clothing and in furniture. And that presentation is going to be an experiment, I think. It depends upon whether we have a lot of snow. And I'll explain that. The woman who wants to present this is a professor down in California. And she really doesn't think she can travel up here to make the presentation, so we're going to try to do it remotely by Zoom. I think we're going to try that. But if it's a great snow year, she's going to come up to go cross-country skiing. And I'm in big trouble because this woman has climbed Mount Everest. Wildfire, clean water, and black holes. Just a few other topics that we hope to be exploring this year. We say this every time, but we mean it, because some of the topics and the speakers that we end up with come from you. Patty is here because she took me aside at a lecture here and introduced herself. She lives here in Sisters with her husband Lynn, and said, "Do you think the group would like to hear about penguins?" And so here we are. So really, I mean it. If you have ideas about topics or speakers, you can email us at scienceandsisters@gmail.com. You can go on our website if you forget that, and it's Sisters Science Club. Just Google that and you'll find us. Okay, I think it's time to introduce Patty. Dr. Patty McGill lives here in Sisters, as I said, with her husband Lynn and their dogs. And she has been enthusiastic about conservation in its many forms and focuses on birds in particular. Patty, just a second. Patty now works part-time as an independent senior conservation scientist for the National Aviary in Pittsburgh. Prior to retirement, she worked at the Dallas Zoo as chief scientist and as vice president for conservation and education for 6 years. And during that time, she also worked as an executive on loan Association of Zoos and Aquariums, AZA, specifically to help with the design and development of the AZA SAFE, and that stands for Saving Animals from Extinction Program. Previously, she worked at the Chicago Zoological Society, Brookfield Zoo for 22 years as curator of birds, and then finally as senior vice president for animal programs. Along with managing bird collection and programs, Patty spent some time investigating ultraviolet vision and coloration in tanagers. During these jobs and responsibilities, the common thread has been Patty's focus on penguins. She served as the first coordinator for the Humboldt Penguin Species Survival Program. During her 20-plus year tenure, she facilitated improving the care, breeding success, and longevity of the penguins, which helped increase their population in zoos and aquariums. I don't know if you've seen the penguin exhibit at the Portland Zoo, but it's actually quite fun. Her work with the captive population led her to meet colleagues working with penguins in the wild, and she has visited the entire distribution of the Humboldt penguin in Chile and Peru. She's led the annual census in Peru since 2000. In 2017, she assumed the role of program leader for the Safe African Penguin Program and coordinates the conservation engagement by zoos and aquariums and others in saving this critically endangered penguin from extinction. Dr. McGill earned her PhD from Cornell University in 1985, and she enjoys watching birds here in Sisters and in doing international, and at many international sites, and hiking and hanging out with her husband and dogs. So, Patty, thank you for being here, and looking forward to it.
tonight. It's going to be a real pleasure to share some of my passion for penguins with everybody here. And I think David outlines my sort of long and not so winding road that brought me here. This is just a picture of a trip to the subantarctic, which was fantastic. That's not where I work on penguins, but boy, was it a treat to go see them there. So, first question in tonight's quiz is, what is a waddle? Oh, no, that's a waddle with T's. A waddle is a group of penguins. So it's not only how they walk, but it's also the nickname for a group of penguins. Okay, so continuing tonight's quiz, who in this room likes penguins? Oh, okay, I mean, who doesn't like penguins, right? Okay, and so what do you already know about penguins? How many species are there? And somebody was asking me over dinner, so you can't answer, but how many species of penguins do you think there might be? 3, okay. 12? 18, okay, somebody got it. 18 species. And they range in size from the little penguin, which is little, about this big, to currently living, the emperor penguin would be the biggest, probably about 4.5 feet, something like that. But fossil penguins were over 6 feet. So there were fossil penguins that were huge animals. Yeah. Okay, where do penguins live? Okay, got some great answers here. You guys are good. South of the equator. All penguins are south of the equator, only in the southern hemisphere. But they range from Antarctica all the way up to the Galapagos, and I'm sure the Galapagos penguin probably occasionally swims across the equator, but they don't actually live north of the equator. So if you like old biologist jokes, like I kind of tend to, there's an old joke about what protects penguins from polar bears.
Different life.
The equator. All right. So do you know the range of habitats that penguins use when they're on land? You know, they really spend most of their lives at sea, but they always have to come ashore to breed, and they come ashore to molt or grow in their new feathers, because they have what they call a catastrophic molt. They drop all of their feathers at once and then grow in the new set. So they have to stand out on land while they're doing that, because they lose their waterproofing, they wouldn't be insulated, so they really can't go out to sea during that period of time. Anyway, so what kind of habitats do they use? And I'm talking here about breeding habitats. Rocky shores, okay? Some of you have seen some of these penguins in the wild, I can tell.
Burrows.
Burrows, ice, yes, all of the above. These are the emperor penguins out on the ice. These happen to be Humboldt penguins here in the desert area. The yellow-eyed penguin in New Zealand nest in the forest, and they find a burrow or down in among the tree roots. And then many different species will use rocky shores as well. Okay, but what is the ecological feature? So they range from the equator to Antarctica. They use the desert, they use the ice, they use a lot of things in between. But what is the ecological feature that unites all penguins? Water. And specific, they can't fly, so they have to swim or waddle wherever they go. But it's cold ocean currents. So even though they occur all the way up to the equator, they're always associated with cold water. So here you can see I made the two biggest cold water currents, bigger arrows. So they call it up here the Peru current, which is also known as the Humboldt current. Let's see here, sorry. Here on the west coast of South America, and then the west coast of southern Africa is the Benguela current. And you can see how those two currents kind of spin off from these various subantarctic currents. So a lot of the species are here in the subantarctic around the world. Of course, only a couple actually in Antarctica. But these southern tips of these continents, where there's a cold current, then also get penguins. And so there's some in Australia, New Zealand, Southern Africa, and a few species here in Southern South America. And the reason they're always associated with cold water is because cold water holds more oxygen than warm water, and so it's more productive. And so these populations of fish, remember, they don't fly, as this gentleman said, they don't fly, so they have to swim everywhere they go. And it's pretty inefficient in the grand scheme of things to swim from food item to food item. So they always feed on schooling prey, so whether it's krill or fish, they feed on prey that occurs in dense clusters because it's much more efficient. And so not every penguin is like this, but the few subtropical and tropical species typically feed on fish, and they feed on these massive schools of sardine and anchovy is their main, and those are dependent on these cold water currents. So, okay, final question on the quiz. Do you have any idea how many of the penguins might be endangered? Well, they probably are, but technically, they're right now on the IUCN Red List. There's one critically endangered, 5 that are endangered, and another 5 that are considered vulnerable or threatened. And, but all but about 2 or 3 species are declining in the wild. So I think, unfortunately, at this point, it might just be a matter of time until they're all in one of these categories of threat. Okay, so the star of the show tonight, even though I've spent 20-something years, actually it's closer to 40 years working on Humboldt penguins, what we're going to actually talk about tonight is the work that I've been doing more recently on African penguins. And I know this lecture series is called Frontiers in Science, and unlike talking about nuclear science or black holes or the paleogenomics, that was an incredible lecture. Anyway, I'm letting the penguins be on the frontiers, and what I'm going to talk about, I guess in a way, would be the frontiers in conservation. What is it that we have available to us these days to really try to save a species like this? So this is the star of our show tonight, the African penguin, the only penguin that occurs in Africa. And you can see on the map just around the southern tip of South Africa, and then up the coast, just partway, maybe 2/3 of the way up the coast of Namibia. So most of this is the west coast there is the Namib Desert. So a pretty dry, barren sort of land side, but incredibly productive ocean side. So they're associated with the Benguela Current, and as I say, only found in southern South Africa. So most unfortunately, this is the only species of penguin that's considered critically endangered. And they were just, they say it uplisted, but I would kind of call it downlisted. They were uplisted to critically endangered about 18 months ago. You can see in October of 24. And they are anticipated, the population biologists over there in southern Africa tell us that they could be extinct in the wild by 2035. So, you know, that's no time at all. It's really coming very soon. One bit of good news is there are a lot of very innovative thinkers, good scientists, good expertise, and quite a number of people really trying to make a positive difference. So that's all good news. But this is what the population curve looks like. You can see back in the 1950s, 150, 140 something thousand pairs of penguins, breeding pairs. In recorded history, you know, maybe 100 years ago, there were probably millions of African penguins. But early on, there were things like hunting, capture for food, oil, a lot of guano harvest. Guano is the accumulation of seabird droppings on their breeding areas, typically, and it's a great fertilizer. And actually, with the Humboldt penguin that I work on in Peru, they have, you'll love this, they have a government agency that manages the harvest of seabird poop. So it's the guano agency, and Anyway, they sell it for an organic fertilizer. It's a great fertilizer. The Inca in Peru used to use guano as fertilizer. But in Peru, they wanted to manage it as a sustainable resource. And so that agency has become this incredible conservation partner in terms of penguins because they protect all of the islands where the seabirds occur. And now about 80% of the penguins that we find in Peru are on those guano islands because they're protected. So anyway, but in most parts of the world, guano was just harvested kind of willy-nilly, and so it was very disruptive to the birds that were nesting there. And there's low enough populations now of the other seabirds in South Africa and Namibia that the guano does not accumulate the way it used to. And we'll get back to the significance of that in a minute. But anyway, you can see they started historically at incredibly high numbers, and now we are down to fewer than 9,000 pairs left in the wild. And that was the December 2025 count. So it's really pretty shocking. And we have not seen any upturn yet, even though a lot of people have been trying to work on this species for, well, really doing research for quite some time, but significantly working on conservation for about the past 10 or 15 years. And we haven't managed to turn it around yet. Okay, so if you haven't spent time thinking about this yet, how do you go about saving a species? Well, first you need to know about the species. You need to know about its biology, what it requires, what it takes to make a living. Sometimes that might mean doing some research. You need to understand what the threats are. What are the issues that are causing the problems? And again, with African penguins, it started out early with being hunting and disturbance around guano harvest and other kinds of disturbance on the islands. And fishermen and other people would hunt penguins for food and take them out to sea with them, I guess. But currently, the biggest threats are warming oceans and lack of food. And those two are really tied together. For many, many penguins, the warming oceans are a problem. And in fact, the emperor penguin of Antarctica was just declared endangered in April, so just last month. And that's the first of the Antarctic species that's been declared endangered. And that's because of the melting sea ice. And so the sea ice is breaking up and melting too early in the season, and the nests are flooding and the chicks are drowning, etc. Anyway, so cold oceans, remember, are critically important to all penguins, and so therefore warming oceans tend to not be favorable to birds like penguins. And the other big problem, as I say, is lack of food. So overfishing, unsustainable fishing, entanglement in fishing gear, all of these kinds of things affect penguins. And the food that penguins eat, the sardine and anchovy and krill, those are three of the major food species for penguins, and those are all great commercial products because you can capture them. Remember I said penguins have to eat food that's in dense clusters, which makes it easy to catch by fishing operations. And there's a growing problem with the so-called ghost fleet of commercial fishing ventures out in the ocean. They usually are not identified by country. They're often not in compliance with international law or local governmental laws. So that unknown ghost fleet is becoming a significant problem. So it makes it harder to control. And of course, many of these countries where penguins occur, either they're small islands, for some of the species, but in the countries, a lot of these countries are economically maybe underdeveloped, and so they often don't have the resources to be out on the high seas trying to patrol their waters and really making sure that the fishing operations comply with regulations. And so, for example, the South African Coast Guard, I think, maybe has 2 boats. So clearly, whereas our Coast Guard monitors fishing activity, they're just simply not able to do something like that. Anyway, so those are the key threats now. The other thing you need to do to save a species is you need to understand what your best strategy is. And I'm looking at this from the perspective of a biologist. So are you going to get the most bang for your buck? For example, if you save adults, and that for some types of animals, that might be you stop hunting or something like that, or there are different kinds of threats that maybe affect adults compared to the young birds in the nest or something. So would that be a way to save the species? Or is it best to increase the number of 1- and 2-year-old animals that get recruited back into the breeding population? And population modelers can now do forward-looking projections of so they build their population model of whether it's increasing or decreasing, and then they play around with, well, what if we could increase the lifespan of adults? What if we could have higher recruitment of the juveniles back into the breeding population? And so that really allows you to try, at least, to focus your most significant conservation efforts on the most significant issue that's going to turn your population around. We haven't quite got there yet on African penguins, but anyway, that's a really valuable thing to know. We did a study like this on Humboldt penguins just before COVID shut the world down. We did it down in Peru, and in that case, it was recruitment of juveniles back into the population that seemed to have the biggest impact. But often you might expect with a species like this that's relatively long-lived, in good times, they might live to be 20. Some penguins probably live longer than that. And so when you have a relatively long-lived adult that accumulates over their lifetime lots of experience with breeding and rearing young, it's really valuable often to save those animals in the population because they are going to be more productive in terms of next year's breeding than a newbie that's never tried it before. And so with these longer lived species, low breeding rate, they only have 2 eggs a year, very often only raise 0 or 1 chicks, especially now. They used to raise 1 to 2 chicks. Okay, so in terms of saving a species, you need to get other people interested involved. You know, all of the stakeholders, whether it's the fishermen or the guano harvesters in Peru or the guy with his dog that keeps getting into the colony and wreaking havoc on the nest. You need to get all of those stakeholders interested in trying to save the species. I mean, if you're really going to be successful. Of course, then it always takes fundraising. We're always fundraising for these key projects that I'll tell you about in just a second. And I added this one, think big. I mean, sometimes you need to try to solve a problem that just feels out of reach, really unwieldy. Okay, so I'm just going to quick tell you what SAFE is. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. So the AZA is the Association of Zoos and Aquariums. It's the Professional Zoo Association here in North America. We do have some international members from other countries, but primarily the zoos and aquariums here. So SAFE, as David said in the introduction, is saving animals from extinction. And when we invented this program, we really did it with the idea that for a long time, conservation had really measured itself more by how much effort was put into it. How many dollars did you spend? How many people did you hire? How many, I don't know, nest boxes did you deploy? But we really are trying to look at the outcomes in terms of what you achieved, not just what did you spend your money on. And so we're trying to train ourselves to really measure our success differently. So very strategic, very outcome driven. We always try to link with, if it's outside the United States, with whatever that range country, if they have any kind of a biodiversity management plan, a recovery plan for the species, we try to make sure that SAFE programs are linked with those. So again, we're helping different countries try to do the conservation work that they've at least outlined for themselves. And the specific conservation actions that are recommended, we get funding and support through mostly zoos and aquariums, but we have some other donors as well. Okay, so the Safe African Penguin Program then is specifically focused on trying to save African penguins from extinction, and we have about 40 partners. So we have 51, I think it is, zoos and aquariums in the ACA that hold African penguins, and we have 40 of those have signed on as partners and support us in one way or another, through either in-kind work or funding. All right, so this program then specifically has 3 what I call buckets of projects. Our first one is Stop the Decline. And you remember that population growth curve, which was not growth, but that population decline. So we have a few projects that are simply trying to make the most of the birds that are still out there, to stop the decline from going further. And then we also have a few projects where we're trying to discover and discover the right, not only the problem, but the right conservation action, the conservation solution on the factors that are really causing this long-term decline. And again, with African penguins, we think it's pretty much the lack of prey, because we've seen lots of adults starving and emaciated, washing ashore on the beaches, and plus the lack of food out there in the waters. So that seems to be one of the big factors for African penguins. But our third bucket of projects is connecting the zoos and aquariums and the penguins they have in their care with wild conservation. So what is it that we can be doing right here in the United States that will help the penguins over in Africa? Okay, so I'm just going to quick summarize some of our projects. So in the Stop the Decline bucket, we have 3 projects there. One is disaster preparedness and response. One is habitat improvement using artificial nests, and the third is hiring and training penguin and seabird rangers. So why is it important to have a disaster response project? Well, I don't know if you remember, but back in the year 2000, there was a massive oil spill off the city of Cape Town, just outside the port, and it oiled not only the port, but several of the islands and part of the main shore right there around Cape Town. And you can see the number up there, 19,000 penguins were oiled. And so you can see here in this bottom picture, they rented a warehouse, and you can see all of these pens with oiled penguins. You can see what a badly oiled penguin looks like, but you can also see that they came in all different degrees of oiling. And this launched a massive international response. Volunteers from all over the world came to help. You can imagine if you had 19,000 penguins to try to care for, you needed a lot of bodies, and over an extended period of time. Because they call it de-oiling, but once you wash and clean the penguin, then you have to wait long enough so they get waterproofed again before you can let them go back out to sea. So there's a long period of just needing to feed them and care for them before they can be released. One thing about oiling is that we don't, if a bird is badly oiled, like this one, they will die just from that amount of oil, But other birds might be only very lightly oiled, or maybe in the process of trying to clean themselves, they ingest some of the oil. And studies have shown that even a bird that's only 10% of its body is oil, it can have catastrophic effects on the hormone system, because they either absorb some of the toxins through their skin, or they ingest it as they're trying to preen themselves, and it can shut down reproduction because the hormone system is out of whack. So there can be secondary effects. So if you want to try to save birds like this, you really need to get them de-oiled, cleaned up as soon as possible, and then ready to put back out in the wild. Oops, sorry. I should say that on average, South Africa suffers about every 1 to 10 years. So it's a relatively short time interval between oil spills. Some of them are pretty small. Some of them don't affect penguins, but affect other seabirds. And some of them are, 1,000 birds or more. We haven't, luckily, in the last 25 years, we haven't had another one like the MV Treasure with 19,000 birds. So this project is all about getting people trained as first responders, so being able to get out there, find the penguins, recover the penguins, get them into care, also how to take those first initial steps in the de-oiling process. We've purchased equipment, deployed it out to different regions. We store some of the critical, larger pieces of equipment. We bought them one of these little trailers, so the equipment is in there, and if they get a call that there's been an oil spill somewhere, they can just hop in and go. We have not tried to buy the bigger pieces of equipment for every single colony along the coast. So we store the equipment, I think it's in 3 different locations that's relatively accessible. They've developed a communication network that's ready for emergencies, and they can do call-ups. They've even conducted first responder drills. They have a pretend oil spill, and they get everybody mobilized and out there and suited up in their PPE and ready to go. And they have now started expanding this up into Namibia as well. Namibia doesn't suffer as many oil spills, but they have some. The other sorry thing that we've learned over the last 10 years is it's no longer just oil spills. I mean, that was the big catastrophic thing that caused us to start a disaster response program. But now it can be disease outbreaks. Avian influenza has swept through the penguin and seabird colonies and has killed a number of birds. Sometimes it'll be even like a flood. Some of these storms are becoming worse, and the floods are worse, and sometimes a whole area of a colony will flood, and then you have all the either eggs or chicks that need to be rescued. The parents, of course, can swim away, but the eggs and chicks get drenched and soaked. So we have new kinds of disasters that we now respond to. And of course, for all of this work, then the penguin and seabird rangers are really critical because they are the first responders. Most of them live in or near the colonies. It's not 100% true, but most. And so they're the first responders. They're also out there on an almost daily basis monitoring what's going on. So they're the first ones to see if there's been a predator that's come through and they have injured penguins that need to be rescued. Just if there's anything out of the norm that needs to be attended to. And they're also being trained as project assistants on some of the other projects that I'll be talking about here in a second. So we do not, here our little group in the United States does not try to employ people in South Africa and Namibia, but we have partner organizations that we work with over there. They do all of the personnel management, hiring and firing and training. So we are really trying to find support for this program. Our goal is to eventually have 3 full-time rangers that our SAFE program can support. That would be our eventual goal. Okay, so I told you that these birds are nesting on the edge of the Namib Desert. So if you were a penguin and you were nesting in the desert, where would you like to have your nest, do you think? In the shade, yeah, absolutely. Well, most of these low-latitude species of penguins, I think all of these low-latitude species of penguins nest underground. So they nest in burrows. In Chile, they nest amid the cactus roots. They're in the Atacama Desert. So they find ways to get underground, out of the shade. It protects them from the solar radiation at lower latitudes, of course. But it also protects them from a lot of predators because they can defend the opening to a burrow pretty successfully compared to just being out in the open. So, why artificial nests? Well, I told you, remember, that the guano has pretty much been scraped off of these islands in South Africa. And so this is pretty much what it looks like. And there are some places where there's a bit of soil or debris that they can dig into, but mostly it's pretty much just rocky substrate, very hard to dig into. So there are some places where there's vegetation. Most of it is weedy, kind of introduced vegetation, but still it provides some shade, so sometimes they can get in there. But a lot of them just out of desperation are nesting out in the open. You can see here, and this guy. You can see also here, there's some old attempts at artificial nests, but one of the problems they had, these were just garbage barrels that they put on the side. Sometimes they've used cement sewer pipe, fiberglass huts of one sort or another, dog kennels. They've used a variety of things, but virtually all of them have overheated in this kind of climate when they're on land. So they asked us to look into designing a nest that would be resistant to that kind of thermal load and getting too hot. So how is a penguin nest like a fire hose? All right, so you may know this, all of you. I didn't know it, and still I just learned about this project. The fire departments here in the United States pretty much rotate out their hoses on a regular basis, because you don't ever want to risk having a hose fail in the middle of fighting a fire. And so Owens Corning is the company that produces that white material on the outside of a fire hose, and it's designed to be fire or heat resistant because it reflects the heat away from the fire hose so the hose doesn't melt. It turns out they also use a similar material that they put on the outside of these big chicken sheds, poultry barns, to keep them from overheating. Okay, go back to the spent fire hoses. So all these fire hoses then needed to find a purpose. So Owens Corning had started working with the AZA some years ago and donating these used fire hoses to zoos and aquariums, mostly to zoos. And keepers are very innovative. They would weave them into a nest for an orangutan night quarters. They would use them as hanging, swinging structures for the small primates. They used them for all kinds of different things. So Owens Corning already had a relationship with AZA, and in some phone call one day, the guy at AZA is telling them that we're trying to think of how to design a penguin nest that will resist overheating. And the guy from Owens Corning says, well, one of our engineers can help you with that. So they helped us come up with the design as well as the material to coat the penguin nest. So they had a whole bunch of different designs. They tried look at this one, it even had dirt and plants, tried to plant it on top. But this is the one they came up with. So it's 2 layers. It's kind of like a tent. So the inside is the sleeping quarters, and then there's an airspace, and then there's the outer fly sheet. And this fly sheet in particular has this heat-resistant coating. You can see it's thicker than the inner chamber, and it's designed so the air will flow, comes in, of course, here in the opening, flows through, and then there's ventilation holes at the back top of the nest. So it's a ceramic-based material. Like I said, it's 2 layers. We now have about 2,000 nests out in the colonies that we've built and put out there. That's in South Africa, and another 200 are out in the colonies in Namibia, but we have more in production for Namibia. We just started that project in Namibia, I think it was maybe 18 months ago we started up there. Penguins like them. About 96 to 100% of them get used, so that's very good. In fact, when they first started deploying these on some of the colonies, where there really was like nothing for these birds to nest in, they would bring them ashore in boats. One place they had to use helicopters. Anyway, they'd bring them ashore. They have a staging area before they get them out into the colonies. And penguins started occupying them while they were still in the staging area. So you know they were desperate for a better place to live. Anyway, we see about 57% of the nests produce chicks. And that doesn't sound like much, but it's better than the wild, the non-protected birds, or what would I say, the birds that are not using these artificial nests. There are some birds nesting in burrows, some birds nesting under vegetation, but the ones that are out in the open really are consistently failing. And during one of these crazy storms that we are now seeing, the difference in chick survival between the ones inside these protected nests compared to out in the exposed nest was really dramatic. We're still trying to get all of these data analyzed. But I just wanted to show you a couple of pictures of the thermal imaging. So here you can see on the top picture, you can actually see an egg in there, but you see the front opening of the nest, 2 layers. And here it is in a thermal image. You can see how hot that outside is compared to the inside. And so there could be like a 30 or 40 degrees Celsius temperature difference between the outside surface and inside the nest. You can see a penguin over here lying out in the open. So this is its beak down here, the head, the 2 flippers. Look how hot its back is. You know, these birds are just suffering extreme heat when they're out in the open. Just another picture of inside a nest. You know, his head is hot because he's sticking it out the hole, but the rest of his body is pretty cool. You can see here, I put this one in just to show you how it slopes up toward the back. So the front entrance is nice and small, so the adult can protect against predators trying to get in, but then the heat rises. So in that sleeping chamber, the nest chamber, there's ventilation holes along the top and it rises up. And then the outer chamber is solid on the top, but then you can't really see it too well here, but the highest part of the back here has all the ventilation holes, so the heat can rise up out. Oops. I just wanted to throw in a picture showing you what it takes to get these nests out into the colonies. So the little factory is in South Africa, and so we employ, I think it's 3 or sometimes more fellows to build these nests. They've got it pretty well down to an art. So they get loaded onto trucks. Then from the truck, you get it onto the dock, you put it on the boat, you put it loaded in the hold, you get it out to the island, you put it in a rubber dubber. From the rubber dubber, you get it up onto the dock on the island, you carry it down the dock. Anyway, you finally get it, so you have to, it comes in 2 pieces, the inner and outer layer. Each one is about 20 pounds, so they're pretty portable. And you have to drill holes in it to, they use these industrial zip ties to hold the 2 halves together once you actually get it out to the island. But they don't try to assemble it on the main shore and then carry it. They take it out into 2 pieces. Anyway, then you carry the thing out to the colony, find a good place to put it, and then you have a happy penguin. Okay, so remember the second bucket was about trying to understand the critical factors that are driving the long-term decline, because it's not sufficient just to stop the decline. Okay, that's not going to save your species unless you get at whatever the big underlying problems are. And so this bucket of projects is about really understanding the issues and implementing, finding out which are going to be the best conservation solutions. So we have one study that's trying to even figure out how long the penguins live in the wild, what are some of the key threats to long life. When penguins are rescued from these disasters, you know, we have this whole rescue and rehab effort, but is it worth it? I mean, it's a lot of time and effort. And so the birds that get rescued and then released back into the wild, do they survive? If they don't survive, then it's really not worth all that effort. So that's one of the questions they were trying to ask. Are there still even enough fish near the island colonies? Remember that inefficiency of having to swim from one food item to the next, so you don't want to be like an albatross can cover hundreds of miles to go find food, or a shearwater or a tropic bird or something. They're very aerial, but penguins have to swim everywhere. So they typically forage within about 15 to maybe 30 kilometers from their nesting area. Is really about as far as they can go and still be efficient in terms of getting back, feeding the chicks, and getting out to get more food. And then, so they've implemented some rules in South Africa about fisheries exclosures right around some of the key colonies, but are those working? Because of course the fishermen, well, the individual fishermen don't mind. They say, okay, I'll go fish somewhere else. But these big fishing corporations want to be able to fish wherever they want to fish. And so they were extremely extremely resistant to having any kind of fishing regulations or exclosures or timing or anything. And so South Africa paid for and launched an international panel to study the issue of fisheries and penguins and came up with some recommendations which everybody kind of agreed they would abide by. And so they have implemented some of these exclusion zones around the key colonies for 10 years, and then we'll see if that makes a difference. Okay, so the first of the projects in this bucket is to have individual identification on penguins. And many of you may be familiar with what's called the passive transponder. You may have it in your dog, or if you have prize cattle, or other kinds of domestic and agricultural animals. It's a little microchip, it's a barcode, if you will, that's inserted under the skin, and then it has an individual identification. And so they've been inserting these in penguins, and if you're familiar with its use in zoo animals, agricultural animals, pets, typically it's put between the shoulder blades, and then the veterinarian or whoever knows right where to pass their wand and can read the code. Well, they tried that for the first year in penguins. Well, penguins have this very upright posture, of course, and they were not getting good readouts because the chip was too far away from the reader. So unless you walked around the penguin colony with your hand reader, you couldn't read them. So now they put it in under the skin along the thigh, so between the knee and the tail really is now where it goes, and so it's nice and close to the ground. Anyway, so you learn these things by trying for a while. Okay, so early on they used the handheld readers like you would use by a veterinarian or in agriculture or something. But now they've gone to these ground readers. You can see one in that picture. There's a black cable lying on the ground. That's the antenna that reads the microchip on these birds. So far about 6,500 penguins have been transponded in the wild. So these are either adults that they can wrangle when they're on or near their nest, or sometimes chicks that are getting ready to leave the nest. But an additional 10,000 penguins that have come through the rescue and release programs. So all of these rehab facilities transponder any bird that they're going to release back to the wild. And so that's been 10,000 of them, that's phenomenal even to think that many birds have had to be rescued and released. So we now have lots of known, not all, but lots of known age birds. Sometimes, if you catch an adult, you don't know how old that one is, but any of the juveniles and many of the ones that were raised up from eggs in the rescue centers. So we now have this massive database, almost 500,000 data points on microchips that have been read. And so you know the date, the time, and the identity of that bird. So now they're really starting to look at those data. I just wanted to show you a couple other pictures of these ground antennae. So you can see just a single one here in the left picture, but on the right, you see how there's two of them in parallel? And so the biologist can, so in the box up there on the rocks is where the recorder and computer lives and stores all the data. Some of them are able to be uploaded to the cloud, and then the biologist can download them sitting at their desk. And other times, in other situations, they have to actually go out to the colony and manually download it from the recorder. But based on, the date, it has the date, time, and individual, and so they now can track whether it crosses that right-hand cable antenna first or the left-hand one first. And so based on which direction they were headed, the biologist can now determine whether they were headed into the colony or they were going back out to sea. And so that lets them start measuring then how long they're in residence at the colony. And based on that, they know whether they're sitting on eggs or feeding chicks, because their pattern of comings and goings is totally different during the egg stage versus the chick rearing stage. And they also then can just, tell how many birds come ashore, how long they're staying. They can even detect probably which ones are non-breeders, because they come and go a whole lot more often because they're not, attached to a nest. Okay, so some of the findings now from these data. I was mentioning that hand-reared versus wild, so they rescue a lot of eggs and chicks that are either flooded, they're starving, or whatever. So they rescue a lot of these eggs and chicks, they raise them up. If they're healthy, then they release them back to the wild. So one study looked at this juvenile survival between a fully wild juvenile versus one that came through the hand-rearing and rescue process. And there's no difference. So that's good because that means it's worth doing. The adult survival in later years do, like a rescued and rehabilitated bird, sometimes a shark has bitten off a leg, sometimes they've been diseased and they get brought in and rehabilitated. So there can be a variety of reasons. Sometimes they're oiled. So a variety of reasons that they might come into a rescue and rehab facility. That analysis is still ongoing. We don't have as many data points in that data set, so they're still trying to tease some of that apart. They're starting to now find out where some of these birds show up. So if they've released them, these ones that came through rescue, if they release them here, do they come back there, eventually nest, or do they show up somewhere else? And how many penguins come back to the colony they were born in? Some of the juveniles we're now discovering leave South Africa, and especially on the west coast of South Africa, these juveniles go out to sea, they turn north, and if they don't find food, then they end up starving on the beaches in Namibia. And so now we're starting to learn more about that. So we're starting to get a lot of great data out of this project now that it's been going on for some time. So there's a project that builds on the first one, and this is the biologists over there call it the APMS project, the Automated Penguin Monitoring System. So this depends on that first pit tag project. It uses that same device to read an individual identification. This team has installed a set of what they call weigh bridges. You can see these two penguins are each standing on top of a scale. And so these guys are getting weighed as they come and go from the island. And so the system, the antenna is there also, so they know which scale they cross first. They get read as they cross. You can see in this case the cable is in between the two scales. And so you know the date, the time, the individual identification, and how much the bird weighed. And so we also have some equipment in this project that collects GPS location. So I'll show you a picture of that in a second. So sometimes then you can not only see, so what they're doing is if they weigh the bird as it's going out to sea, and then they weigh the same bird when it comes back, they can tell how much weight it gained and over how long a period of time. And so that's starting to give them an indication of how good the prey supply is around that colony. Because of course they'll be faster and heavier if there's a good supply of fish there. And so this is associated with that attempt to have these fisheries exclusion zones. And this team is trying to say, okay, if there's an exclusion zone, is it really beneficial to the penguins? Are there more prey? Are they eating faster? Are they getting heavier, i.e. being able to bring more food back to the chicks compared to a colony where there is no regulation on the fishing? And so this project is going to be really critical in convincing the fishing industry whether or not they need to keep those exclusion zones in place. Well, they need to convince the South African government, but then they still have to get compliance. Okay, so that's what this project is about. I just threw in a couple pictures of these so-called weigh bridges. You can see here the two scales. They have like a little funnel that they create out of this fencing material. So it funnels the birds as they're coming ashore or going back out to sea. I loved this one they sent me because they had to invent this little wooden extension here to keep the rock hyrax from digging in under the scales. And then of course, you know, it wasn't getting an accurate reading because there was a rock hyrax sitting under the scale. And then this is just another cute picture of penguins crossing the scales. So this team has been very innovative, inventive. They've taken stuff that was tried on other penguin species around the world, and they've really kind of made it their own. So this map just shows, here's the coast of South Africa. Well, I guess it's the country of South Africa, but this is the coast here. And all of the red circles are where the passive transponders, the pit tags, are in birds, and they have the readers on the ground to record the comings and goings. And then these with the little black computer screen with a cloud, that indicates that there's this automated penguin weighing system in place too, so you can see where they're scattered. I've also put in this picture of this, penguin, to show you this thing here on its back. They call that a biologger, and it collects different kinds of data. So it'll collect GPS location when the bird is out at sea swimming around. Every time it surfaces, it'll take a location. It can get dive depth, and so then this team can also tell more precisely where they're foraging around the islands. And a few of these also have cameras, and I don't know if this will, yeah. So here's a penguin wearing a camera, chasing a school of fish, if you can, and there he got one. So they're trying to calibrate their, if you will, the precision of the weigh scale with being able to actually observe the behavior as well. So, oops, sorry. Move on. Okay, so here's what some of their preliminary data look like. I put yellow arrows up here to show you the two islands that are in the data here. So this is Bird Island. You can see here's the island. So that's where all of the penguins were originating from. And then here's all of the tracks where they went out foraging. So based on wearing these little GPS locators, you can track where the penguins are going. And then likewise here on Dyer Island, the island is over here, and they're going out in this direction. So this has really helped them refine these fisheries exclusion zones, because originally the Minister of Fisheries just drew a circle around each of the colonies. But you could see, if you drew a circle here around Bird Island, you would miss, the diameter wouldn't be sufficient to get really the area that's important to the penguins, and half of it would be unused. So a couple of the conservation groups over there, BirdLife South Africa and a group called Sandcob, brought a lawsuit against the minister to get her to redraw the exclusion zones so that they really incorporated the penguin foraging area, not just a circle around each site. So that was a good outcome of this project. Okay, so finally then, what are we doing to connect zoo penguins with wild conservation? Well, there's three different things that we're working on right now. One is that potentially, so we're just starting the conversations on this one, but if this population in the wild is crashing that fast, there could be a bad day that comes when the birds are virtually extinct in the wild. But we have a population of about 1,400 African penguins here in the AZA zoos. There's some in Europe, there's some in Asia. And so could we use these captive populations to help restore the wild population? Sort of like they did with Andean condors. When they got down to the last 20, they brought them into captivities and really bred them up. So now they're back up to, 200 or 300 in the wild. And so this is what in conservation circles they call an insurance population. So it's not that we would ever send adult penguins over there. Number one, they probably wouldn't know how to go thrive in the wild, but you might risk introducing disease or whatever, parasites. So you don't want to take adult birds from, say, here to go over to South Africa, but you could easily send eggs. Egg transport was perfected for trumpeter swans, peregrine falcons, a variety of different bird species, oh golly, 50 years ago maybe. So, you know, it's really not a new technique. If you needed to, you could potentially transport eggs over, raise them up, and then try to find some safe colonies. But until we solved the problems in the wild, there would be no point just introducing more birds just to not survive. So, but that's the kind of a someday So right now, we're just genetically testing our whole population. Anybody that we don't have a really precise heritage all the way back to the wild, just to make sure we really know who's who and what's what, and would only send the best genetically important eggs over if we ever needed to do that. But in the meantime, we're using, our veterinarians are using information that they gain to help support and rehab the birds in the wild. And of course, there's always the challenge of engaging a variety of public audiences. So we, of course, are mostly focused on the 200 million zoo and aquarium visitors we have here in the United States, but some of the same techniques and methods and content we share back and forth with South Africa and Namibia, and try to make sure everybody's really telling the same story and telling the significance. And of course, what the populations over in South Africa can do is quite different than what we can do. You know, not letting your dog roam around the penguin colonies is not something we need to worry about here in North America, but it is something that they need to pay attention to over there. Anyway, so the veterinary network just got started last year, and we now have a crew of both zoo and aquarium veterinarians from here, and 3 or 4 different range country veterinarians, 1 in Namibia, 2 or 3 in South Africa, and they have monthly phone calls now, and it's a hoot to listen in because they talk about some of the wildest cases that they've all seen and share ideas about, you know, what they know and how they could share information. So it's a great collaborative opportunity for these guys. Our veterinarians cannot just go over to South Africa or Namibia and practice veterinary medicine. It's about a 6 to 12 month process to get permitted to do that. So it's not like they could just go over and volunteer on a in a veterinary way. They could go over as a volunteer and just clean cages or, you know, pools, but they can't practice veterinary medicine. But they can sit at their institution on their computer, looking up research and the you know, tools that they have access to, and help find solutions to problems. So right now they're working on some projects on looking at there's a fungal disease of the lungs called aspergillosis, and really trying to get the best identification of those cases without having to do surgery on the bird, but be able to identify it, and then what are the right drugs to treat it, what's the best protocol. They're looking at that for avian malaria. So they've got some projects now that they're working on together. And especially then, if ever there's, whether it's a disease outbreak or some kind of really sort of catastrophic thing that the veterinarians over there are trying to deal with, they may not have time to sit down and do a literature search on, you know, the best, you know, treatment for some obscure disease that they're suddenly having to deal with. And our veterinarians could do that for them, send them all the information, get them all set up. I think eventually they may also try to help with finding access to some equipment and maybe even some funding to help with some of the studies they're doing. So this team is really going great guns now. On the public engagement and education front, our team has developed a toolkit that's mostly for use in schools, but they have some materials now available for families. Some stuff on, you know, what you can do to help penguins, and they have games for kids, etc. They mobilized around a thing that was called the Not on Our Watch campaign a couple of years ago. The minister in South Africa, maybe good thing or bad thing, she made the statement that not on her watch would African penguins go extinct. So this crew over at the Two Oceans Aquarium in South Africa latched onto that, and they started this whole campaign called Not on Our Watch. And it was an international campaign to write letters to the minister reminding her that she was going to focus on African penguin conservation and try to save the species. So they had thousands of respondents, and it was really a worldwide movement. So it was great fun. We have, again, these sort of basic fact sheets you can see up there in the corner. Our website, They have a Facebook page too. Again, they have a lot of stuff for teachers and schools, but more and more things for families all the time. So what are some of the new projects that we're working to develop? And we are thinking about whether it's possible to use drones. Drones are something we use pretty regularly with our work with the Humboldt penguins, but South African government is not very open to letting people fly drones even out over these penguin colonies. So that's still, a discussion in progress. But they're a great opportunity to not have to intrude into the colony, but just fly over, get a lot of pictures. You can do a lot of visual monitoring. The person who's the drone operator can watch on the screen what the drone is seeing. So it can be a way to really reduce disturbance and reduce the risk, especially in, like, if we have a medical outbreak, a disease outbreak, you don't have to walk into the colony and risk spreading the disease around. You could maybe monitor things with a drone. But again, still a little bit off on that one. But we have a project, we're starting it up in Namibia, and we're then thinking of ways we could expand into South Africa to train and use artificial intelligence to help us with saving penguins. And what this project wants to do is train the AI, and we would start out getting photos and videos from a lot of our zoo partners right here, because we can collect all of that film and footage and train the AI to recognize not only penguins and penguins in different kinds of postures, but recognize gulls that can be intruders into the colonies, and they'll gladly steal the eggs and young chicks. Seals and sea lions, they can be very destructive intruders into a colony, and sometimes even humans will intrude into colonies. So then, if the AI detects an intrusion and a disturbance in the colony, it will send an alert to the ranger. And the first island that we want to try it out on is one of the islands in Namibia where it's just not suitable for a ranger to live there, but they're only about 15 minutes from the port, and so if they got an alert, they could jump in the boat and get out there and try to solve whatever the problem is. But in some of the colonies in South Africa, or even some of the bigger islands in Namibia where the ranger might be living on the island, but they're way the heck at the other end and might not know what's going on 24/7, in all parts of the colony. So you might be able to use it in a case like that. There's places, a couple colonies in South Africa that are on the mainland, and they have a lot of trouble with predator incursions. Things like caracals will get in and kill the penguins, stoats and some other things. And so you could maybe be monitoring the colony with AI and could identify or alert the rangers as soon as, because so many of those incursions are at night. And so the system that we want to get funded is going to be able to work 24/7. It'll be night capable as well. And there's another project we're hoping to just get started this year, looking at the DNA in penguin poop and being able to identify not only is it a male or female, so if it's one of these individually identified penguins, then you know what you're working with, a male or a female. And every time you handle a penguin, it poops. So you can, if you're handling any penguins that are identified, you can collect its poop. But also then, even if you don't know all of the individual identification, this biologist also wants to be able to identify, looking at the DNA, which prey species, which prey item the penguins are foraging for. Because as their preferred prey are disappearing, they're turning to other prey items. Sometimes it's a fish that's not as easy to catch. Sometimes it's one that's not as nutritious. Sometimes they're eating something totally different, and we'll start being able to identify what is it that they're actually resorting to eating. So we're always thinking about, can we do more? Can we do it differently? Should we shift our priorities? And so we periodically go back through everything we're doing, try to figure out, can we do it better? Have we done enough of it? So now we can turn our attention to something else. But the question that I keep challenging our team to ask ourselves is, how do we think differently? We've been at this for 10 years now. The population is still declining. Are there different partners that we need over there in the range countries? Is there a different project we should be funding? You know, what is it that could we and should we be doing something different? So just a quick summary here. So here we sit in Oregon, and these penguins are half a planet away. What can we do? And so, you know, when I talk to school kids, I say, keep studying. You know, learn what you can on behalf of conservation. Maybe it's the biology of penguins. Maybe it's the biology of fish. Maybe it's the biology of their worst predators, you know, and what drives them to predation. Studies on penguin genetics, maybe more about AI, drones, other emerging technology. You know, in the next few years, there'll be some new technology that you have to ask yourself, can we use that? Or maybe you don't particularly like science at all, but you could figure out how to raise money. You could, you know, figure out how to market our projects and or how to write grants. So we have a variety of ways that we currently raise money. We have a program called Invest in the Nest, and that's their website. So they let people adopt nests, and then you get a plush penguin and some other goodies if you pay for a nest. A nest only costs, well, with production and transport to the colonies, most of the nests are about $70, depending on how far we have to transport them and whether they have to go by helicopter or boat, etc. Transponder tags, you know, we're buying these by the hundreds, and so that can be a project that somebody, you know, takes and runs with it. Support one of these crazy weighbridges that this team is now using. Host a ranger. The ranger salaries are only, they're about 17,000 US dollars a year. So that's a year's salary for these rangers. And a lot of them, especially the ones up in Namibia, are people who've gone through a biology program, and they just love it. They're all working on special projects now and are really very keen to be involved in this conservation work. But learning more about sustainable seafood, you know, that's a challenge for all of us, trying to figure out how to do that better. You know, donating expertise. I wrote in here, write a children's book. I have a couple leads. One of my neighbors gave me a lead on possibly somebody who could help me write a children's book. So, you know, we're just getting more people engaged in what's going on and learning about penguins really all over the world. These low-latitude species tend to be the ones that are in the worst trouble. But now that emperor penguins up in, you know, down in Antarctica have been declared endangered, you know, they're all in trouble. And then that's our website at the bottom. But I had to put this in for a middle school that I was talking to recently, and they loved it. So, you know, as part of thinking big, is there something we can do about climate? You know, I mean, it's wreaking havoc, of course, on many land-based ecosystems, but oceans, and especially these cold water currents in the oceans, are really being disrupted. And, you know, one of the things I need is an oceanographer that could tell me everything I need to know about why these current patterns are changing and what's happening. But even, you know, supporting green energy at home, supporting companies that are trying to be more conscious of sustainable products and sustainable energy, supporting politicians that are trying to make the planet better. That's more discouraging some years than others, but it's something we can all do. But these are just some of the ways I say join the Waddle, because remember what a Waddle is? It's a group of penguins, so join the Waddle. It's all hands on deck. We've been at it for 10 years, and I say up there we have 10 years, but it's potentially only 9 years now. So it's really, we're in a crisis mode, and we're just trying to be innovative and creative and support our colleagues in Africa that are trying to do the best work possible. And we lead a couple projects, and we support others through funding, so we have a variety of ways that we're trying to work on this. But we had a couple kids, this certificate of donation down here I thought was one of the cutest things. They were called Siblings for Seas. It was 2 kids, and they decided to make bracelets and sell them. And they came up with $250 they sent us. So I thought that was just such a sweet thing to do. The picture in the center is actually a lot of my Humboldt penguin colleagues in South America, and they got in on that international Not on Our Watch campaign. And well, of course, they don't have African penguins in South America, but they called it Band Together for Banded Penguins, because Humboldt penguins and African penguins are in the same genus. They have that black band across the chest, etc. Anyway, so thank you all for your attention tonight. I really enjoyed talking to you, and I don't know if we have time for questions or not. I'll let you. I'll let you pick people.
Hello, I'm going to try to bring the mic to you.
I don't get it, I'm loud.
We're trying to get it in the recording too, so be really loud.
Oh, two questions, two parts. One is, what is the average height and weight? I can't tell. And the other part is, I know explorers lived on them to survive. Do you have a problem with the African of poachers, people wanting to eat them?
Okay, so height and weight. An African penguin is about that tall. So what is that, 2 feet, something like that? And the weight varies. The ones in zoos and aquariums tend to be a little bit pudgier because they have a nice stable food supply. But I would say probably, 20 or even 30 pounds, maybe. They're pretty dense. Yeah, and so they're kind of a mid-sized penguin, yeah. And in terms of poaching, that's not really a problem in Africa anymore. We still see some poaching in South America in some communities, and they're really trying to, that's becoming a thing of the past, but it's not quite there yet in Peru. But in Southern Africa, I haven't heard about any humans poaching them for food anymore.
I'm wondering with those penguin shelters, houses, do you have to anchor those down? Are they subject to blow away in storms, or do they just sit there?
So the question, I hope you could hear it, is do you have to anchor those artificial nests down? And the answer is yes. And what they've come up with, instead of trying to hammer a stake into the ground, which would be very difficult, they've just put a flange on the side of the nest, and so we pile rocks on top of it to keep it from blowing away. In the typical daily winds, it probably wouldn't blow away, but in storms they definitely could. So we just pile rocks on top. Do you want to use the mic? Okay.
Yeah.
So in your graph, you had 2 instances of the same graph, and about 2000, there was an uptick in the population, which was good news, then a gap, and then a downswing. What was the uptick and what was the gap?
Well, the uptick is unknown, and we saw an uptick in the Humboldt penguins over in South America at the same time. So that says to me it was something about the global oceans that was going on, but we don't know what that was. Anyway, so yes, it was a temporary uptick, but then in both species, it just fell apart again after that. And so the gap there around 2000, I don't know the history of, that was before I was involved, and I don't know why they didn't get out to do the census that year. In South America, when we've been doing the census, a couple times we missed years because of we couldn't get the teams pulled together and the funding and everything. More recently, in Peru, we had, of course, COVID one year, and then we had a tsunami one year, and then we had political unrest one year, and the Pan-American Highway was closed, so we couldn't go anywhere. So, there's different reasons why these censuses don't happen when we'd like them to. That's part of doing field work.
What are the primary predators of the African penguin on land and sea?
Okay, so the primary predators on land would be, if they're on the islands, then gulls will prey on the eggs and chicks. But the adults really would typically just be maybe the fur seals. And there are certain fur seal individuals that decide they want to specialize on penguins. And so those are the ones that are really dangerous. In South America, we also see sometimes the sea lions over there will prey on penguins, but there it's a little bit different situation because it's the subadult males, which I think are starting to feel their oats and want to show their strength and all of that, and they'll just throw the penguins around. They don't actually eat them, but they kill them. And the fur seals in South Africa, I think, and in Namibia, I think kill them more almost by crushing them because they go stomping through the colony. But they will kill some outright, purposely kill them as well. Now at sea, of course the fur seals could be at land or sea, but at sea the main predators would probably be sharks. There are increasing number of shark attacks that we're seeing. Killer whales sometimes, but that's not so much because they're not even close to shore as much as the sharks are. On the land-based sites, the mainland-based sites, i.e. not islands, because there's luckily only 2 or 3 of those, dogs will get into the colonies and they can just wreak havoc. Let's see, sometimes there are caracals, like I said, that get into the mainland colonies. Caracals are one of the big cats. They're very agile cat, and they'll come in. I think those are the main land-based predators. We don't typically see, jackals, or typically they just aren't so coastal.
How devastating are those populations on the populations of penguins? It's hard to count mortality in penguins. So the question was, how devastating are those various predator populations on the penguins? And, so many things now are kind of slightly out of balance. So whereas we used to always think, when I was still a student, you were always taught that predators and prey kind of stayed in balance. But, the more we disrupt the system, it favors one group or another. And so, for whatever reason, we're seeing real shifts in the shark populations. So great whites are kind of absent from much of the South African coast right now, for whatever reason, but other sharks are coming in. And the pinnipeds, the fur seals and sea lions, overall tend to be increasing over there, so they're kind of getting out of balance with the penguins. And caracals, things like that, I'm just not sure how they've changed over time. I don't know enough about them really.
Anybody else? Over there?
Yeah. How does the penguin adapt to humans? When you're out there with them, do they adapt to the presence of human? And if they're in a zoo, do they ever end up relating to humans?
Okay, so how do penguins adapt to humans? Do the African penguins in particular adjust to human presence? And in zoos, do they actually is there a risk of them relating, what we would say becoming imprinted on humans? And so most penguin species are really pretty tolerant of humans. You see all the pictures of people walking among the king penguins and emperor penguins in Antarctica and the subantarctic, and the delis swimming around the boats. And so most penguins are really pretty tolerant of human presence. I think some colonies can start getting really skittish when they've had bad experiences with humans or human disruption. And so there's an interesting study that was done on Magellanic penguins in Argentina, where they have a colony they've been studying for years, and part of the colony is open to tourists, and there's a boardwalk. And what they discovered was that the penguins who were nesting close to the boardwalk, turns out, were the most complacent penguins. They had almost no stress hormones, whereas the ones that were farther away from the boardwalk were the ones that were more easily stressed. So I think in that case, what the penguins were doing were actually sorting themselves, and if they didn't like the boardwalk, they just went to another part of the colony. So you want to make sure that if you've got something like tourist access, that it's limited to just a portion of the colony. We are seeing one of the colonies on the mainland in South Africa is declining faster than any of the other colonies. And we think maybe there's just simply too much human disturbance in that colony at this point, because it's kind of on all sides. And so I think they're going to have to rethink how they manage access to that one. I'm going to tell you about at least one of the exceptions, and that is these crazy Humboldt penguins that I work on in Peru and Chile. They are terrified of humans. If they even see us in a fishing boat offshore when we're trying to do the census, they stand up and they stretch up their necks and they start looking around. You can tell they're getting nervous and stressed, and so we'll back off. But I think that maybe the reason they are so alarmed by human presence is because the Inca hunted them, I don't know, 2,000 years ago, 1,000 years ago, and I think they just learned to avoid and be alarmed by humans. I think that was a learning process. The ones that survived were the ones that ran away. And so the Humboldt penguins, and I have not encountered all 18 species in the wild, but I know most of them are pretty tolerant of humans, but not Humboldts. But in the zoos, yes, they can become imprinted. And so anytime you're having to raise a chick by hand, you always want to be sure to expose it to other penguins, not only to humans. Otherwise, all it knows are humans, and you need to make sure it knows other penguins.
One more, right here.
You spoke of the ghost ships, and it sounds like protecting the food supply might be the biggest conservation, success. Or if you were able to do that, they'd probably live a lot easier, better. Is there a way that to enforce the rules because it sounds like it's kind of lawless out there, though.
It can be on the high seas, and you see it in many, many countries, these illegal, squid fisheries or one thing or another. Yes, you're totally right. I think solving the problem of uncontrolled fisheries, because you don't have to stop all fisheries, but you have to probably stop the uncontrolled fisheries. And the fisheries biologists will even tell you that getting better assessments of the fish stock so you know how to set your limits at more appropriate levels, because what in some countries they tend to do is they say, okay, this is our limit for how much fish you can catch. Of course, that doesn't always account for the ghost fleet, but at least for the legal fishery, this is how many fish we're going to allow. But if the fish population itself is going through cycles, in a good year, that's perfectly fine. But in a bad year, then you're just driving the fish population even lower because you're probably taking out more than can be recovered. And so when you talk to fisheries people, they'll tell you there's even some things like that that could be done that would at least improve the situation. There are some groups that are starting to kind of be the police force on the high seas, and they can track some of these boats by satellite or whatever, and they try to go intercept them and one thing or another. But I think at the international level, we don't have a good compliance, mechanism for this, for fisheries, high seas fisheries. Okay, I think we need to say goodnight. And wants to come up, I can hang around for a few minutes.
Thanks, Patty. And you know the drill. If you have a minute and you're able to do it, come to the chairs. And thanks for being here.